In the stillness of your heart, have you ever felt an inexplicable stirring, a quiet yet undeniable whisper that tells you it's time to move? Perhaps it comes in the form of restlessness, an unease that you cannot shake, or the sudden realization that where you are no longer feels like home. Chosen one, do not be afraid. This is God's whisper, calling you to step forward into the unknown. When God calls His chosen ones to leave, it is never without purpose. You are not being abandoned. You are being elevated. The discomfort you feel is not punishment, but preparation. He is shifting you out of stagnation, removing obstacles, and positioning you for something far greater than you can imagine. The journey may seem uncertain, and the road ahead may appear unclear, but trust this: God never calls without leading, and He never leads without providing. In this message, we will explore how to recognize when God is calling you to leave, why this transition is necessary, and how to embrace it with unwavering faith. Stay with me until the end, and if this resonates with your spirit, type "I trust God's call" in the comments. Let's embark on this journey together. The divine whisper of transition. God does not shout when He calls His chosen ones. He whispers. It is in the quiet moments, the stillness of our souls, that we hear His voice urging us forward. This whisper may come as an unshakable feeling, a gentle nudge, or a deep knowing that change is on the horizon. The world around us may remain the same, but within, something shifts. That is God's way of preparing His chosen ones for transition. Throughout Scripture, we see how God calls His people to move forward. When He spoke to Elijah, it was not in the wind, the earthquake, or the fire, but in a gentle whisper. 1 Kings 19:12. When He led Abraham, He did not give him full clarity, only the instruction: go from your country, people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Genesis 12:1. God's whispers are not meant to explain everything at once. They are meant to guide us one step at a time. C.S. Lewis often reflected on this in his works. He believed that God's whispers are a call to transformation, and a divine change is often uncomfortable yet necessary. In Mere Christianity, he wrote, "Imagine yourself as a living house. God comes in to rebuild that house. At first, you understand what He is doing, but presently, He starts knocking the house about in a way that hurts abominably and does not seem to make sense." Lewis recognized that when God calls His chosen ones to leave, it is not to harm them, but to rebuild them into something greater. God's whispers come when a season has been completed. Perhaps you have grown comfortable in your current situation, but comfort is not always a sign of God's will. Sometimes it is a sign of stagnation. When God whispers, it's time to leave, He's not just talking about a physical location. He's calling you into a deeper spiritual transformation. He is shifting your heart, your mind, and your spirit to prepare you for what is next. If you have felt this stirring within, do not resist it. This is not an ordinary feeling. It is a divine signal. You are not meant to remain where you are forever. When God calls, He has already prepared the way. Your only task is to listen and obey. Chosen one, are you ready to move forward? When God calls you to leave behind the familiar, there comes a time in every chosen one's life when God whispers, "It's time to leave." His call is rarely convenient, and it almost always requires leaving behind the familiar. places, people, and comforts that once felt safe. Yet, this divine instruction is not meant to break you, it is meant to elevate you. God does not call His chosen ones to remain stagnant. He calls them to step into greater purpose, even when it means letting go of everything they have known. The Bible is filled with stories of individuals who had to walk away from the familiar to embrace their destiny. Abraham was told to leave his homeland, his family, and all that was comfortable without even knowing where he was going. Genesis 12:1. God didn't reveal the entire plan. He simply said, "Go." And in Abraham's obedience, he became the father of nations. Moses had to leave Egypt twice, first as a fugitive, then as a leader called to set God's people free. Had he clung to what was familiar, he would have never fulfilled his divine mission. When God calls you to leave, it is never without purpose. He sees what you cannot. There are relationships that no longer serve you, environments that no longer align with His plan, and situations that, if you remained in them, would keep you from growing. Sometimes what once nurtured you is now hindering you. And so, in His wisdom, God stirs your spirit, making you restless in the places where you were once comfortable. You may feel the pull to leave a job, a friendship, or a way of living that no longer reflects who God is shaping you to become. At first, it may seem painful. After all, human nature clings to what is known. But growth never happens in comfort. If you stay too long in a place that God has already left, you risk missing what He has prepared ahead. C.S. Lewis once said, "There are far better things ahead than any we leave behind." This is the truth of divine transition. You are not losing. You are being positioned. You are not being forsaken. You are being redirected toward something greater. If you feel God urging you to step away from the familiar, trust Him. His call is never random. When He removes something from your life, it is because He is preparing you for something you cannot yet see. Obey, and you will step into a season of divine fulfillment. Discerning God's call, signs you are about to leave. God does not call His chosen ones without first preparing their hearts. If you have felt an unshakable sense that something in your life is about to change, pay attention. This is not your imagination. It is divine communication. When God begins to transition you, He places signs along your path, whispering to your soul that it is time to move forward. One of the clearest signs that you are about to leave is a deep sense of restlessness. What once satisfied you now feels empty. The conversations, routines, and places that used to bring comfort no longer resonate. You may feel as though you are outgrowing your current season, and no matter how much you try to ignore it, something within you knows you cannot stay where you are. This is God stirring your spirit, making you uncomfortable in places that no longer align with His plan. Another indication is when doors begin to close. Opportunities that once flowed freely now seem blocked. Relationships that were once effortless suddenly feel strained. Plans that once made sense start falling apart without warning. It can feel frustrating, but in reality, this is God's way of redirecting you. He is preventing you from staying in a place that is no longer a part of your destiny. What just seems like rejection is often divine protection, and you may also notice unexpected opportunities emerging. Just as God closes doors, He also opens new ones. Perhaps you suddenly receive an offer to relocate. A new job appears out of enters your life, who inspires you to step into something greater. These moments are not coincidences, they are divine alignments. God orchestrates circumstances to guide you where you are meant to be. A significant sign that God is calling you to leave is a shift in your spirit. You may feel an overwhelming sense that change is coming, even if there is no logical reason to believe so. This knowing is not based on circumstances. It is an inner conviction placed in you by God. The Holy Spirit is preparing your heart for transition. Many who have been called by God to leave behind the familiar can testify to these experiences. A woman who felt unfulfilled in her corporate job suddenly found herself drawn to missionary work, despite having no prior desire to leave her career. A man who lived in the same city for decades began to feel a deep yearning to move, only to later discover that God was leading him into a new ministry. These are not random urges, they are divine summons. C.S. Lewis reminds us that God often leads us to places we never imagined, not to abandon us, but to shape us into who we are meant to be. If you feel the undeniable pull to leave, do not dismiss it. God is speaking. Listen closely and trust that He is preparing the way for your next season. The sacrifice of being chosen. To be chosen by God is an honor, but it is also a path of sacrifice. When God calls you to leave behind the familiar and step into the unknown, not everyone will understand. Some will question your decisions, others may distance themselves, and in some cases, you may find yourself walking alone. Take heart. This is the cost of being set apart for a greater purpose. Jesus Himself warned of this sacrifice. In Matthew 10:22, He said, "You will be hated by everyone because of me, but the one who stands firm to the end will be saved." Walking in obedience to God often means standing apart from the crowd. People who do not share your spiritual vision may misunderstand your journey. They may say you're reckless for leaving behind a secure job, foolish for walking away from certain relationships, or naive for believing that God is leading you somewhere greater. But remember, God's plans are not for everyone to understand, only for you to obey. Loneliness is one of the greatest challenges of answering God's call. When Jesus called His disciples, they had to leave their families, professions, and everything they knew behind. Luke 5:11. Even Christ Himself often withdrew to solitary places to pray, finding comfort in His Father rather than in the approval of men. If you are experiencing loneliness in your calling, know that you are in good company. The road of the chosen is rarely crowded, but it is always accompanied by God's presence. Beyond loneliness, there is also loss. You may lose friendships that no longer align with where God is taking you. You may lose opportunities that once seemed promising but were not part of God's plan. You may even lose aspects of your old self, the version of you that was content in a place where God never intended for you to remain. The shedding process is painful, but it is necessary for your transformation. As Jesus said in John 15:2, every branch that bears fruit He prunes, so that it will be even more fruitful. If God is removing something from your life, it is because He is making room for something greater. C.S. Lewis wrote, "Hardships often prepare ordinary people for an extraordinary destiny." What you are going through is not punishment, it is preparation. God is refining you, strengthening your faith, and shaping you into the person who can carry out the assignment He has placed before you. In these moments, has already gone before me. Fear whispers, you are alone, but faith declares, God is with me. Fear tempts you to turn back, but faith pushes you forward, reminding you that every sacrifice will be rewarded in due time. Chosen one, do not grow weary. If God has called you, He will sustain you. The path may be difficult, but the destination is divine. Trust Him even when the sacrifice is great, for His promises never fail. Embracing the unknown with faith. When God calls His chosen ones to leave behind the familiar, He does not always provide a roadmap. Instead, He asks for faith. Faith to step forward when the destination is unclear. Faith to trust when there are no immediate answers. Faith to believe that even when the path is uncertain, His plan is perfect. Stepping into the unknown is never easy, but it is the very essence of faith. Hebrews 11:1 tells us, faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. If God has whispered to you that it is time to leave, it means He has already prepared what is ahead. Your role is not to understand every detail, it is to trust. C.S. Lewis spoke often about the nature of faith. He believed that real transformation occurs not when we are in control, but when we surrender to God's divine plan. In the Screwtape Letters, he describes faith as a journey where God desires us to trust Him even when we feel abandoned. He wants them to learn to walk and must therefore take away His hand. And if only the will to walk is really there, He is pleased even with their stumbles. This is the truth of walking in faith. God does not give us every answer up front, because faith is built in the unknown, the moments of doubt, the steps taken in uncertainty, the times when fear tells you to turn back. These are the very moments where faith is refined. God is not asking you to move with full knowledge. He's asking you to move with full trust. You may be struggling to let go. The life you know feels safe, predictable, and comfortable. But comfort is not where faith thrives. It thrives in surrender. Peter would have never walked on water if he had waited until the waves were calm. He had to step out of the boat first. Matthew 14:29. If you're waiting for absolute certainty before you obey, you will never move. Faith requires action before clarity. God is not just calling you away from something, He is calling you towards something greater. The discomfort, the uncertainty, and the fear you may feel are all part of His divine transition. You are not losing, you are being positioned. God does not call His chosen ones into the unknown to abandon them. He calls them there to transform them. You may not see where you're going, but you can trust the one who is leading. If God has spoken, then it is already settled. The only thing left for you to do is step forward in faith. Chosen one, when you trust Him enough to walk into the unknown. The power of obedience. Why God requires immediate action. When God calls you to move, obedience is not optional. It is essential. Many times we hesitate, trying to understand every detail before we take the first step. We delay, overthink, and question whether we truly heard God's voice. But delayed obedience is disobedience. When God calls His chosen ones, He expects immediate action, because every moment of hesitation can hinder the blessings He has already prepared. Throughout Scripture, we see the power of obedience and the dangers of resisting God's call. Consider Jonah. When God commanded him to go to Nineveh, Jonah ran in the opposite direction. Jonah 1:3. His disobedience led to chaos, not only in his own life but for those around him. Only when he obeyed did he see God's miraculous plan unfold. Had Jonah listened immediately, he would have avoided unnecessary suffering. This is a lesson for every chosen one. When God speaks, the safest place to be is in obedience. Contrast Jonah's hesitation with Samuel's immediate response. As a young boy, when God called his name in the night, Samuel answered without delay, "Speak, for your servant is listening." 1 Samuel 3:10. He did not question or ask for more time. He obeyed. Because of his willingness to listen and act, Samuel became one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. God does not call without purpose. If He's prompting you to leave, there is a reason for it. Perhaps He's removing you from a place that no longer serves you. Perhaps He's leading you into a new season of growth, ministry, or opportunity. But if you resist, you risk missing the timing of His blessing. When the Israelites stood at the edge of the promised land, their hesitation cost them 40 years in the wilderness. Numbers 14:33-34. What could have been theirs immediately was delayed because of their fear and doubt. C.S. Lewis once wrote, "The moment you wake up each morning, all your wishes and hopes for the day rush at you like wild animals. And the first job each morning consists in shoving them all back and listening to that other voice, taking that other point of view, letting that other larger, stronger, quieter life come flowing in." This is obedience, to silence our own fears and logic in order to hear and follow God's voice. When God tells you to move, it is because He has already prepared what is ahead. He does not need your full understanding. He needs your faith. If you wait for certainty, you will never move. If you hesitate, you may miss divine appointments, relationships, and breakthroughs that were meant for you. Chosen one, do not delay. If God has spoken, act. Move in faith. Trust His timing. Step into His will. The blessings you seek are often on the other side of immediate obedience. Will you answer His call today? You are being prepared for something greater. Chosen one, God has not brought you this far to leave you now. The stirring in your spirit, the discomfort in your current season, the sudden shift in your life, none of it is by accident. These are divine signals that He is preparing you for something greater. You may not see the full picture yet, but trust this. God has already gone ahead of you. He has made a way where there seemed to be no way, and all He asks is that you walk forward in faith. The road ahead may feel uncertain, but it is not unknown to God. He has called you and He will sustain you. Do not fear what you are leaving behind. What lies ahead is far greater. Every sacrifice, every step of faith, every act of obedience is leading you closer to His divine purpose for your life. Trust Him even when the path is unclear. If this message resonates with you, declare it in the comments. I trust God's call. Share your experience. Or has God been speaking to you? Like this video, subscribe, and join this community of believers. You are not alone in this journey. God is moving, and your breakthrough is near.